Here are my top tips for using torch paste with Ikonart. So first things first, you want to prep your wood. This is going to depend on what your wood looks like, but no matter what type of wood I'm using, I like to sand it a little bit first with 220. This is especially important if your wood is super textured, but even on a smooth wood, I like to sand it a little bit first. After sanding, I just wipe off the excess dust. And then this next step is optional, but it's super helpful if your wood is textured. You can take your heat gun and heat up the wood a little bit, and this is just gonna help your stencil stick to the wood a little bit better. Like I said, this is optional, but if you have textured wood, it can help. Next, of course, you have to make your Ikonart stencil. We use our purple film on wood. It is a little bit stickier, so just print our design, expose our stencil, wash it out, dry it, post-expose, and then of course we're ready to use it. So I put this box around my artwork that was the exact size of my piece of wood, so that way I know exactly where my design will be centered on the wood. So I'm just going to cut my stencil out and then apply it to my piece of wood. It is repositionable, so if you need to adjust it a little bit, you can. You can use your hands to just rub down the stencil. You can also use our white squeegee to really rub down and push down and make sure there are no air bubbles underneath your stencil. Once your stencil is applied, you're ready to apply your torch paste. Torch paste is nice and thick, so I don't really have to worry too much about bleed underneath my stencil. I usually just apply the torch paste by dotting on a few globs like this, and then I take my black squeegee and squeegee the torch paste across my stencil, making sure to use plenty of pressure. I want to make sure that thick torch paste gets in all of my mesh openings and that every single mesh opening is, covered with torch paste. So I'm just using pretty decent pressure here. Again, I'm not too worried about bleed because of how thick the torch paste is. And then after I have my whole design covered, I'm just going to go over it again and scrape off any extra torch paste. And I just put that right back into the torch paste container. And honestly, even a bigger design like this, you're using barely any torch paste. So a container like this will last a long time because you are scraping off all that extra and putting it back into the container. And you really want to leave as little as possible behind. So again, I'm using pretty good pressure to scrape off this extra. You don't want a really thick coating of torch paste left behind because that's going to, first of all, be really difficult to wood burn. It's going to take a really long time, but also it's just going to leave a thick ash behind, which of course you don't want. You just want enough torch paste on the surface of your wood to be able to burn the wood and not leave a bunch of burned extra behind. All right, so once you have all of the extra scraped off, you can just go ahead and remove your stencil. This is always so satisfying, especially on a design like this. I love seeing all those tiny details hold so beautifully. And again, because the paste is nice and thick, this all looks great and it held everything so nicely on top of that wood. Now I'm just going to let this sit for a minute or two while I wash out my stencil, because of course my stencil is reusable. So I'm just gonna let this sit and dry for about 1 to 2 minutes and then we'll go ahead and wood burn. All right, when wood burning your design, you wanna make sure to use a heat gun that is at least 1,000 to 1,200 watts. We actually use an 1,800 watt heat gun on the highest setting. And you want to make sure you are doing this on a surface that is heat safe. This is a cement floor, what we are doing this on. If you don't have anything in your house that would work for a background, take it outside, take it to your garage floor, something that is heat safe because this does get really hot and it does take a little bit of time. Speaking of that, how long it takes to wood burn your design will depend on a few factors. Of course, your heat gun will matter, but also the type of wood that you're wood burning. All wood is going to burn at different rates, so you're just gonna have to play around with that. And also, if you have any type of wood that's like glued together, like in sections, like a cutting board perhaps, or some kind of cheaper wood that's maybe like glued together instead of a solid piece of wood, This high heat can cause your wood to crack in those areas, or basically the seams to come apart where they're glued together. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're deciding what types of surfaces to wood burn. Those type of surfaces you might want to just use a paint on instead of torch paste. But on a solid piece of wood like this, torch paste works so beautifully. I just love when you start to see that color change. And I always try to keep my heat gun moving. I don't just hold it in one spot. Again, this is gonna depend on the type of wood you're burning. Some types of wood, the background will discolor along with the torch paste depending on how long you're heating it up. So if you hold that heat gun in one spot for a long period of time, that background will actually start to burn. The wood will start to burn where there isn't torch paste. So I just keep my heat gun moving at a slow pace so I'm not creating any heat spot in one particular area. But again, the type of wood you're using will affect this as well. So obviously I'm speeding this part up so that we're not here all day, but just for reference, this piece of wood is a 5.5 by 9 inch sign, and it took about 7 minutes to wood burn. All right, after you're done wood burning, you just wanna let the sign cool completely. It's going to be very hot, so don't just go pick it up, let it cool down first. And then once it's cooled down, you just wanna take some water and a cloth, or even like a baby wipe or something like that, and wipe off that extra ash off of the top. So this is going to create a nice smooth finish where you can't feel that design at all. So if you don't wipe this off, you are left with where the torch paste burned on top of the wood leaves a slight coating. So this is what you just wanna wipe that off first. So after this, you have a couple different choices. If you want your board to be food safe, say you're doing some sort of cutting board, then you can use a mineral oil. Just let your board, completely dry after you wash it off, and then apply a food safe mineral oil or food safe oil to your board. And this is actually burned into the board, so it would become food safe after that. I am going to actually be finishing off this sign with a stain. So all I'm doing is applying this oak colored stain right over the top of my design with a brush, and then wiping it off with a cloth. And I just really like how this finishes off the sign. So those are my top tips for using torch paste with your Ikonart stencils to wood burn signs. My name is Fawn, and I share tips and tricks on how to make and use Ikonart stencils. If you'd like a more in-depth tutorial on how to make stencils, you can check out this tutorial right here. And subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell so you get notified every time we upload.